Stay with us as we bring in Bernard Goldstein live from New York. He's a former assistant administrator for research and development at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. Professor Goldstein, thanks for being on the program. As I mentioned, dozens of governors and mayors really pledging to uphold the Paris Climate Agreement. What and how much can they really do here?
Well, I expect they can do a lot. The United States has in the past done a lot, despite, for instance, George Bush Jr. pulling us out of the Kyoto Agreement. So this will continue even without being part of the Paris Agreement. But it's a very dumb idea to back out of the Paris Agreement.
I want to bring in my colleague Sean Callebs with a question he has.
Professor, I had a chance to speak with a number of researchers last week, and a lot of them point out that the U.S. is currently the #2 emitter of greenhouse gases, but for decades, generations really, the #1. So the U.S. enjoyed all this time where it could build up its industry, and now telling other developed nations you can't do it, and not kicking in the billions of dollars to help them develop energy and industry in a more pragmatic fashion. What do you say to people in the U.S. who support what Trump did?
Well, first of all, I think you have to read what Trump said. Trump basically is saying that why should the U.S. pay for this when there was no knowledge that this was going to be a problem, and when, in fact, for instance, on the NATO issues, others are not paying for our involvement in the world. So the argument that's being given is one that Trump basically is saying, not that global climate change will not occur. He's saying that this is a trade issue, this is a sovereignty issue, and one has to listen to that and counter that argument, not bring up a separate argument.
And speaking of the money part of this equation, the financial shortfall, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg's organization has pledged $15 million to fill the gap. Professor, that is not enough, is it?
Well, as to how much it really is going to cost, it's going to cost, I think, any estimate that I know of is probably an underestimate. All of the effects that will occur because of global climate change are incalculable at this point. Whether they be mitigation of the cost of mitigating, the cost of preventing the effects, or they be the cost of just dealing with the adverse effects on people and on our environment.
Well, the cost may be open for discussion in the future, but look at what's happening internationally. China has become the international leader in pushing for environmental changes. Now, large part because they're going through what the U.S. did in the 70s in terms of trying to get clean air, clean water, clean soil. But what does that mean? And secondly, does the U.S. run the risk of being way behind in developing alternative energy, which is really going to drive the economy moving on through this century?
Well, I was very fortunate when I was at EPA in 1984 to go to China with $1 million of U.S. taxpayer money to work with the Chinese and develop the first research efforts related to the environment that were jointly done between the U.S. and China. So I'm a strong supporter of U.S.-China cooperative agreements. I'm also was there when President Reagan gave EPA its first money, and I think that was 1984, 1985, to look at the global climate issue. So there's no question we've known about this for a long time, and we can anticipate that there are going to be lots of problems. How these problems work out, they're very difficult to tell at this point, but we know that they will cost a lot, and there's no question that the U.S. being part of the Paris Agreement will be much more helpful than if we're out of the Paris Agreement to the United States.
Sean Callebs and Professor Bernard Goldstein, thank you to you both.